Hi. This chapter doesn't excite me all that much. Lots of drugs to learn, and there's history that's relevant. The next chapter, chapter 8, has more substance to it. Uh, Depressants were very big when I was younger, uh, less so now, I would say. Sleeping pills, that's another uh, topic that's still relevant today. I get ads all the time uh, for sleeping pills, and GHB was huge for a while, but less so now. Uh, Depressants, barbiturates, sedatives, bennies, benzodiazepines, hypnotics, inhalants, GHB. Uh, Lots of terms, nothing that should hurt your head at all. Um, Chloral hydrate. I used to have huge amounts of chloral hydrate in the lab. I forget what I was doing with it. It wasn't being used as a drug. It was used in histology. I had like a mayonnaise jar of it. And there's our famous bartender, Mickey Finn. I've given you a little link. Whoops. uh, on Mickey Finn. It's a famous term. You'll see it in old movies, um, cop shows. Uh, the it started out with chloral hydrate. It can be used more widely now. Uh, that's pretty historical. 1896 to 1903, Chicago. Um, and then there's a million uh, references to it being used in popular films. I see Happy Days. I see Annie. Yeah, I mean it's big. It's a term. If you want to talk to old people like me, uh, you should know something about. Just be able to use it in a sentence. So there's Mickey Finn, and we got. I have a few other links here that. Whoops. Um, what the heck just happened? I'm in the book. Oh, I'm over here. Sorry. Um, so Paraldehyde, uh, it's a depressant. I mean, being able to sedate people definitely had potentially some um, value. Barbiturates, there's several different kinds. I've used a few of these in research. They can be used um, as anti-epileptic agents. And phenobarbital, there's one there that I've used on rats, and pentobarbital is in here too, and I've used that on rats. And as anti-epileptics, these can be very useful. I sure as heck do not recommend them as sleeping pills. The common story here is that you'd go to old Doc Wilson saying, I'm having trouble sleeping, and Doc Wilson would give you barbiturates, and they work quickly, and you immediately go to bed and become unconscious, and you think you're sleeping, but when you do an analysis of your sleep patterns, it's not normal. And there's rebound from taking barbiturates. And as we've seen with other drugs, the rebound is often the opposite. So if the barbiturates put you down, your body starts moving in the other direction up. And when you run out of your prescription barbiturates, you have a heck of a lot of trouble going to sleep. And you think Doc Wilson is brilliant because while I was getting those pills, I was sleeping, but you weren't. You were being influenced by barbiturates. And now you go back for more. And there was a time when you could just keep getting these, and they're dangerous. One thing about barbiturates, and we've talked about therapeutic indexes and dose response curves. Um, with some barbiturates, tolerance develops more so to the effective dose of the drug, and you have to keep increasing the dose, which moves the therapeutic dose uh, closer to the toxic dose, and bad things can happen. Another interesting effect of barbiturates is they really suppress REM sleep associated with dreams. And when you come out from under the barbiturates, you spend a lot of time REMing. It's called REM rebound. And while you're REMing, you dream, and the dreams tend to be nightmarish in quality. And when you have a nightmare, you often wake up. It's you don't want to go where these drugs can take you. And there's a lot of famous people who had problems with barbiturates and died. And the newer drugs are safer. And here's one of them. Let me just take you back to the links I provided. And celebrity deaths and barbiturates. This is not a very professional site, but some famous people you will probably recognize. For example, Marilyn Monroe. And these drugs are often, barbiturates are often combined with alcohol. And alcohol and barbiturates do not play well together. It increases the toxicity of both. And Judy Garland, and then for me, these names become less familiar. But certainly you should know Marilyn Monroe and Judy Garland, Over the Rainbow, Judy Garland. And celebrity deaths and barbiturates, yes. We'll just keep going and come back to those other links later. So this drug was introduced in the early 50s, and everybody thought it was great, as they often do with new drugs. And you can get dependence, and now it's a Schedule 4 drug. It's controlled, but again, I really would not want to see you guys to take any of these quinone India sedatives. Germany did a lot of work with both amphetamines and barbiturates. And as I mentioned, unbeknownst to Hitler, he was taking some of these things. So, once it was over the counter, now prescription only. Japan had a problem too. Lots of overdoses. These are dangerous drugs. And blues and soap operas, drug culture, it's abused, suicide, Schedule 2, 1985. Methaqualone no longer available as a prescription drug. It's now Schedule 1. Librium, this was quite popular as a prescription drug, liberates you from anxieties. This came around in the 60s, and less drowsiness. You're more functional. Dependence that didn't seem to be much of a problem, and this if you had to take a drug, this was a better drug than the older barbiturates. Valium, people are still taking Valium, which is diazepam. And Valium is a huge seller. I had a few students who had anxiety flying, and we had to fly to neuroscience meetings, and they would take Valium before the flight. Diazepam mentioned a lot in the Dawn system. It's definitely better than the traditional drugs, but something you would prefer to not take with any regularity. You can see why these drugs have appeal because they seem to bring you peace, and humans are always looking for that. I would recommend meditation. And there's Michael Jackson. That didn't go well, and his physician got in trouble. He was using a ton of drugs. And it's you make mistakes and you overdose and you go to sleep and you never wake up. And there's more history of benzodiazepines and Rohypnol, and that's infamous as a modern date rape drug. Yeah, there it is right there. So it they reformulated it in 1997. So if you put it in a drink, you would get a color change, and you would be less likely to be surprised by it. Non-benzodiazepine hypnotics, they don't have the same structure, and chemistry is going to be important here. Ambien, I'm sure you've heard about that. Sonata, Lunesta, these are all, I'm pretty sure, drugs that are still available today. It works. They're talking about Ambien works quickly. It seems to help with sleep. I can't tell you what the quality of sleep is. EEG. They must have done research on this. Sublingual. We don't talk about sublingual administration of drugs all that much. For chemo, I get a sublingual anti nausea drug. Works real good and real fast. And here's date rape drugs. And during my teaching time at Scranton, this became a huge issue. I hear about it less now, but I'm sure it's still out there. And I provided a link or two here that's relevant. And again, alcohol, which is a date rape drug, is often combined with these drugs, which makes them way more impactful. So GHB is what's being discussed now. And the structure is simple. There it is over on the right. It's it naturally occurs, and it turns into water. And in Europe, it's used sometimes in the process of birthing babies. Here's a reference to GABA. Now, the GABA is a neurotransmitter, has several receptor sites, and they are wicked complicated. And we sometimes get the overly simplified idea that if a drug interacts with a neurotransmitter at the receptor site, it's literally where the normal neurotransmitter goes. But these receptor sites are like little cities in cell membranes, and you can dock. It reminds me of Cloud City, I think it was, from Star Wars, where you could come in and dock your ship in one of many places. And if the drug docks in some locations, it will affect whether the GABA receptor works normally to GABA. And often these drugs are going to increase the effectiveness of GABA. GABA is a ubiquitous inhibitory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system, and alcohol interacts with it, and barbiturates interact with it, and GHB interacts with it. And what's really weird about GHB is it's naturally occurring, which is pretty bizarre. And it's really easy to synthesize. There's narcolepsy. It can be used for alcoholism, uh, fibromyalgia, which is a mysterious phenomenon, uh, and excessive sleepiness with narcolepsy. And it's it it can be used recreationally. It can be used clinically. It's natural if you're looking for natural drugs. Um, but I don't think I would mess with it. And here's our friend GABA, as long as we're on this trek. So this is and if you should go flip back and forth and look at this and the GHB. Um, it's the chief inhibitory neurotransmitter in the mammalian nervous system. It's big, and two major classes of receptors, A and B. Um, these aren't very important for this course in term. I mean, how they work isn't overly important, uh, but in my behavioral neuroscience course, these are a big deal. Ligand-gated ion channels. So that's going to be that's GABA A works very quickly, and you affect ions going across the cell membrane. You can pervasively affect that cell. GABA B are metabotropic, a term I don't think we've introduced. Um, these work much more slowly, but they're they're very important to the normal functioning of the nervous system. GABA tends to be inhibitory, and I'm not going to test you on this, but if you're at all beginning to be intrigued in terms of how all these things work, I hope you'll spend some time looking at these things. There's a picture on the right of messenger RNA. embryonic variant of GABA producing enzyme in a 1-day-old Wistar rat. That's pretty far up in the forebrain. GABA is very important to forebrain functioning and is probably involved in a number of conditions that we'll deal with later. So I'm not assigning it, but it's a very important neurotransmitter in the mammalian brain. And if when you drink alcohol, you're messing with GABA. And when you take many of the drugs in this chapter, you're messing with GABA. And increasing the effectiveness of GABA can be pretty relaxing. And yeah, here's a discussion of GABA and barbiturates act at a separate binding site nearby. It's on the receptor complex. So it's too complicated for this course, but it's true. So you might as well know it. And there's anti-anxiety drugs. I've done a little bit with some of these in my research on fear and pain inhibition. So, there's some drugs, anxiolytics, hypnotics, half-life we've mentioned before. Sometimes you want a short half-life so that you can deal with things fairly quickly and then it goes away, but sometimes you want longer lasting effects. Look at Valium, diazepam, 20 to 100 hour half-life. So that one's going to get in there and affect you for a fairly long period of time. And that the physicians used to believe something and now they tend not to. They used to give these drugs out like candy, some of them, and it really didn't help the patients all that much. Psychiatrists, when I was at UCLA, there was a big debate between two schools of thought on psychiatry. The one published an article saying, why did we make you into a psychiatrist? We made you into a physician, and then you threw away medicine and you talked to people. So largely that was an attack on Freudian type psychiatry. And there's, you can see some hidden hostility in this chapter and the next one too, that psychiatrists are using drugs and they don't talk to their patients all that much. Well, you're a physician, and if your patient needs drugs, hopefully you're good at it. And psychiatrists are often part of a multidisciplinary practice, and counselors or clinical psychologists can be in there too. And the patients can get good pharmacology and good behavioral treatment. And I'm in love with cognitive behavioral therapy, which can be used for virtually all the problems discussed in this chapter and the next chapter. And we're back to sleeping pills, which I've already mentioned about. Well, I have a friend who is very dependent on these sleeping pills, and I've learned not to argue with them, but I don't think it's going to end well. And yeah, there's Ambien and GABA A, and insomnia is pretty vicious. And again, I would try cognitive behavioral as part of this. I mean, drugs can play a role, but I would rather see people get their issues under control with cognitive behavioral therapy. And there's Dawn again, and here's non-drug related ways to get to sleep better. Anticonvulsants, I've already mentioned this. Seizures. Our Supreme Court justice has had one or two epileptic seizures. I'll tell you, man, if they usually attack these very aggressively, because if you let the seizures go, there's a phenomenon known as kindling, and if you is Survivor still on? But in Survivor, they were always building fires, and to build a fire, you need kindling. And what you do is you start with trivial things to burn, and then use them to burn bigger things. And some epileptic phenomena exhibit the phenomenon of kindling. You let the seizures go a couple times, and the trigger becomes easier to trigger. And so the physician has to get the doses right, and this is often a long-term problem, and epilepsy is extremely disruptive of normal life. So psychological dependence, and there's our drugs again: Valium, Librium, Xanax, and rats or other animals will press levers to get IV administration of barbiturates. And if the barbiturate hits you fast, short acting, that's a much better stimulus for self-administration. And that's a general rule of thumb in terms of addiction. If you want something to be addicting, you want it to hit you hard and fast. And so there was psychological dependence. Here's physical dependence, alcohol withdrawal syndrome, which is very real, narcotic withdrawal, very real. And these drugs have that potential. And cross dependence is possible. That is, you can become addicted and or dependent to one, and that addiction will generalize to other drugs that work through the same neurotransmitters. And they can be toxic, and they can be fatal. And I've given you a list of some famous dead people. Tolerance is an issue here. Depressants with alcohol or opioids. Now, and of course, I would say opiates. Alcohol and depressants are both largely messing with GABA. So they interact and synergize very effectively. Opiates, very different pharmacological way of affecting the nervous system. But people who want to have a drug-induced bliss, that combination can be good too, and famous people have died from that. And Keith Ledger, and famous people, unfortunately, with lots of money, they can shop for physicians who will give them what they want. And a recently dead talk show host had an opiate problem, and he was able to shop around and get lots of opiates. I think eventually he got over that. Inhalants, oh boy, such a bad idea. Huffing. All I can say here is you've got to be kidding me. Look at I work with a lot of these volatiles in the laboratory situation, and yes, a lot of them, xylene, toluene, acetone, uh, yeah, and you got to use those with lots of ventilation, and you take these to intoxicating levels, and the odds are you're killing neurons, which is not something uh, I would do to get high for sure. And there's butane and nitrous oxide. There's a place up on Mulberry Street that used to sell whippets. Um, I remember going to neuroscience once, and it was legal to use whippets and nitrous on the streets of New Orleans. People were falling over. Um, it's not as bad as some of the other things up here, toluene, xylene. Oh my God! But not something to do recreationally. Boy, I've used a lot of ether. Yeah, you've seen a link to my dissertation. All my animals were anesthetized with volatile ether. I'm lucky I didn't blow up because we didn't worry about it being explosive. And speaking of ether, gaseous anesthetics, amyl nitrate, uh, which has recreational use, glass poppers. There was a movie where the ultimate bad guy was uh, popping amyl nitrate, and boy, he got scary when he got dosed with that. The solvents, jeez, this chapter really depresses me. And we've already mentioned, many of these from that table. Uh, and there's our neurotransmitter, GABA, which is structure related uh, to the barbiturates and alcohol, and the GHB. So there's doses. It has a very short half-life. Uh, and no, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. Yeah, this was marketed as something that was pretty smart to do. I don't believe it. Um, and oh yeah, then how are we going to kill people? There was just an article on public radio today about death with dignity, and some people from the U.S. go to Mexico to buy drugs that are used to, quote, put down animals that are suffering. And the U.S. citizens go to Mexico to buy these drugs um, because they want to die with dignity. And there's a discussion of those drugs that may work effectively to sacrifice people. I worry quite a bit about these cocktails that include drugs that paralyze you There was a time when researchers would simply paralyze animals and do surgery on them, fully conscious. And they used to do that to human children too. They would do open heart surgery on paralyzed infants because they were afraid that using general anesthetics would be too dangerous. So these children were fully conscious and paralyzed, and they went in and cracked their chests and did open heart surgery. No. Let me just say no. And the 2000 GHB was put on Schedule 1. Of course, in Europe, it's used clinically. Boy, this chapter depresses me. And hopefully we're done. So, there's history here. There's a lot of death here. There's trying to treat anxiety and sleep problems, huffing, paint out of a plastic bag is insanity. And it affects more than just the brain. Abusive indolence, especially of the volatile solvents, can lead to organ damage, neurological damage, other more than with alcohol or other psychoactive substances. Boy, I hate this chapter. It's just too real, and I know people are destroying their lives with some of these drugs, and the pharmaceutical companies make the classic mistakes where they come up with a new drug and they push it and they think it's safer, and sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. So hold on to your hats when you read this chapter. Please don't go down the rabbit hole with much of what's in this chapter. The next chapter is kind of neat. I'm ready for that one. So thanks for listening. This is the saddest I've been at the end of a chapter. Be safe out there.